There is a particular kind of argument that never actually ends, even after the conversation has technically stopped. You have already won it, in your own mind, a dozen times over the perfect sentence you should have said. The point that would have finally made them understand. The version of events where you are, unmistakably, right? And still, hours later, sometimes days later, you are replaying it, refining it, fighting a battle that no one else is even still standing in. Why does being right so often cost more than it seems to give back? Why does winning an argument, even convincingly, so rarely deliver the peace it promised? Before we explore this together, subscribe to this channel where we uncover the hidden psychology behind everyday life. Picture a house with a room you visit constantly. Though nothing new ever happens inside it, the same argument, replayed on a loop, the same imagined opponent, the same triumphant final sentence you never actually got to deliver. You return to this room so often that you have nearly forgotten there are other rooms in the house entirely. What would happen, you might wonder, if you simply stopped walking down that particular hallway? Carl Jung believed that a great deal of psychological suffering comes not from what actually happens to us, but from what we continue doing internally long after the event itself has ended. He might have asked, gently, why a person would voluntarily remain in a room built entirely around being right, when peace was available in nearly every other room of the house. What if the one thing capable of shifting your entire life is not something you begin doing, but something you finally, deliberately, stop? Here is the behavior worth naming plainly: the compulsive need to be right. In every disagreement, every misunderstanding, every small friction with another person, regardless of the cost to your own peace. Stop needing to win, and something in your life begins, quietly, to rearrange itself. Why would surrendering the need to be right change so much when it seems on the surface like giving something up rather than gaining anything at all? Perhaps because the need to be right is rarely about the actual disagreement. It is about something older, something that has very little to do with whoever is standing in front of you. Consider what the habit actually costs. Relationships strained not by real conflict, but by the refusal to let a small misunderstanding simply pass. Hours spent constructing arguments no one will ever hear, at the expense of a present moment that will never return. Peace, quite literally, traded for the fleeting satisfaction of having the last word in a conversation most people will forget by tomorrow. Was that trade ever actually worth it? Alfred Adler believed that much of human conflict is driven by an underlying, often unconscious fear of insignificance, the anxious sense that if we are not right, we somehow do not matter. Being right becomes quietly a substitute for being secure. But is winning an argument actually the same thing as being valued? Or is it simply a temporary, exhausting performance of significance, repeated indefinitely because the underlying insecurity was never actually addressed? Jung might have said that the need to be right often functions as a shadow behavior, an unconscious compensation for a deeper uncertainty about one's own worth, dressed up convincingly as principle, or honesty, or simply refusing to let something unfair go unchallenged. And here is the harder question worth sitting with honestly. How much of your own certainty, in your most heated disagreements, was ever really about the truth of the matter? And how much was about needing to feel, if only for a moment, secure? Picture the tree standing bare through winter, appearing from a distance like something finished, without depth. Beneath the surface, unseen, the roots continue their patient widening in the dark. Is releasing the need to be right truly a loss, the way it initially feels? Or is it simply the visible cost of something steadier, finally beginning to take root underneath the noise? This is the turn worth making gently here. Letting go of this particular habit will likely feel, at first, like losing something important: your voice, your position, perhaps even your sense of justice in the situation. But this discomfort may actually be the early stage of something Jung called individuation, the slow, uneven process of becoming a person whose peace no longer depends on winning every small dispute life presents. Individuation, at this stage, rarely feels triumphant right away. It tends to feel initially like defeat. Only later does it begin to feel like freedom. So how do you actually practice this in the middle of a real disagreement? This is where the observer becomes essential, the quiet witness inside you, capable of noticing the urge to win before it takes over the entire conversation. Not the part of you that immediately constructs the next counter-argument the moment someone finishes speaking. The part that can simply notice, calmly, I feel the need to be right rising in me right now, and I do not have to follow it all the way to the end. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that very little is actually gained by winning small disputes, and a great deal is lost time, peace, the quality of a relationship in the effort to do so. Can you feel the pull toward the perfect rebuttal and simply let it pass, choosing instead to remain present rather than victorious? Can you allow a small misunderstanding to exist unresolved without treating it as a battle requiring your full participation? And here is something worth noticing. If you look honestly, this exact compulsion has likely repeated itself across many disagreements, many relationships, many years, wearing different faces but following the same familiar shape. Why does life seem to recreate this same test again and again in new arguments with new people until it is finally recognized and, eventually, released? Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious in us tends to reappear in our lives as pattern the same argument, essentially, replayed indefinitely in different circumstances until it is finally understood rather than simply repeated. Perhaps this is not really about the specific disagreements currently in your life. Perhaps it is the newest version of an older question. When did you first learn that being wrong meant being unworthy? And are you finally ready to separate the two? Viktor Frankl believed that between what happens to a person and how they respond, a space exists narrow, but entirely their own. You cannot control whether someone else disagrees with you, misunderstands you, or sees a situation differently than you do. But the space between feeling the need to win and choosing, instead, to simply let it go, that space belongs entirely to you. So what does this shift actually look like in ordinary practice? Not something dramatic. Not a single sweeping decision that transforms your entire personality overnight. It might look like ending a disagreement with you may be right, even when you are fairly certain you are not, simply because the relationship matters more than the point. It might look like sitting with someone's misunderstanding of you without correcting it, and noticing that your worth remains entirely intact regardless. It might look like choosing peace over the exhausting satisfaction of the last word, and discovering that peace, once tried, is far more sustaining. It might look like walking away from a small argument mid-sentence, not out of avoidance, but out of a genuine preference for your own calm. None of this arrives with fanfare. Jung once suggested that people will do almost anything to avoid facing the discomfort of releasing a familiar habit, even one that costs them dearly. And if that is true, then simply choosing peace over being right, quietly and without announcement, may already be a significant act of courage. Return, for a moment, to that room in the house, the one built entirely around old arguments replayed endlessly with no one left to hear them. Imagine standing in the doorway now, not to relive the argument one more time, but simply to close the door gently, and walk instead toward a room you have been neglecting for years. Does that feel like surrender? Or does it simply mean you have finally chosen where you actually want to live? And so we return to the question beneath this single shift, beneath every argument won at the cost of peace, every relationship strained by the refusal to simply let something small go unresolved. What actually remains of you, once the need to be right in every moment is finally set down? What remains when your worth no longer depends on having the last word? Jung offered an answer that has outlasted him by nearly a century. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Perhaps the one thing capable of shifting your entire life was never something to add to an already full existence. Perhaps it was simply something to release a room, long overdue for closing, so that quieter, steadier rooms might finally have the space to be lived in. If this resonated, subscribe to this channel and join us as we keep uncovering these hidden truths. What is one argument you are finally ready to let go of? Write it in the comments below, and let that room, wherever it exists in you, finally close its door.